Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm excited this week to be able to talk to you about this incredible book called Tiny Habits. And at the end of the day, the reason why you're watching this is to improve your life. So in this video, we're gonna talk about how habit change, behavioral design, and this Stanford trained professor and how he breaks down habit change. Let's check it out. Okay, so I absolutely love Tiny Habits. The book and then Dr. BJ Fogg's work is the same work that goes behind Instagram and other incredible behavioral psychology work. Now, you don't need to be a behavioral psych nerd or be a biopsych nerd like I am to really love this book. So we're gonna start with what was the core central idea of this book. So Dr. Fogg's work is focused around a behavioral model called the Fogg behavioral model. It's named after him. And you could see the Fogg behavioral model here. It's a simple concept where B equals MAP. Now you'll see this graph right here pop up over and over again throughout the book for good reason. Once you understand how this simple model works, you can then start to design behaviors and outcomes for your life, which leads to the main point of this video, which is understanding that anything that you want is on the other side of a behavior, typically a repeated behavior. So once you understand that, it's interesting because on your entrepreneurial journey or on your creative journey, it's easy to find tactics on SEO, let's say YouTube, lighting, those come up, reading a P&L, raising venture capital if you want to be venture backed. But one of the things that often gets overlooked but is so powerful is actually changing your behavior. If you know how to change your behavior on command, at will, you have an unfair advantage against those that don't, because you can adjust and be agile, be iterative, be lean, insert all these key entrepreneurship buzzwords here super quickly simply because you understand how to craft your behavior. So let's get into the 8 takeaways from Tiny Habits that you can use to craft your behavior and will also instantly transform the way you look at your behavior. Starting with number 1. So the first takeaway is a simple one, but I love it, is the definition of behavior. Behavior is something that you could do right there, right now, or at a scheduled time in the future. So the examples he gives in the book is you can eat a carrot, you can open a textbook and read 5 pages. You can create a garage sale to have an emergency fund. You can announce it. Those are things that you can do right then and there. What's nice about this definition is it makes it really simple and really easy to design around versus all of these abstract terms that makes it really difficult for you to figure out, what am I actually doing? What am I moving towards? What is the goal? So that's number 1, just having that foundational takeaway, which is here. This definition of behavior will make your life so much easier. And then it leads to the next takeaway. The next takeaway is aspiration or outcome. What I love is in this book, in Tiny Habits, Dr. Fogg gets rid of the word goal because goal is a squishy, amorphous, nebulous kind of idea. You're like, how do I wrap my head around this? Yeah, it could be smart, but it doesn't really fit what you're doing when you're looking for behavior, which a quick reminder, here's the definition for behavior. So in this case, he gives an example in the book of he's working with executives at a bank and they are trying to get their customers to save more. And as a result, they're like, hey, we want them to save $500. Well, going back to the definition of behavior, you can't save $500 in one day. I mean, you could, but at the end of the day, he's like, they can't do that right now. What they can do is sell some stuff on, let's say, Facebook Marketplace, sell some stuff in a garage sale. They could do that, announce the garage sale. Those are actions they could do. You want to take them down a habit chain. So that's relevant because effectively they are designing for an outcome there. And that's the key takeaway of understanding the difference between aspiration and outcomes. Is an outcome is measurable. You can measure it. Hey, I want to lose 50 pounds in 30 days. Or I want to save a $5,000 emergency fund in a year. Third could be, I want to make 3 YouTube videos a week. You could check that, you can verify it, you can measure it. An aspiration is something that you want to become. It's aspirational. You want to move towards it. Think of it as aspirational is abstract, right? So when you look at these two, it's kind of like, let's say I want to be less stressed. I want to spend more time with my kids if for that, or I want to be a better manager. Those are things that, those are some things you grow into, but then you have to take a look and go back and say, okay, what are these behaviors versus just a goal? So a good way to remember it, aspirational is abstract, outcomes measurable. So that's the second key takeaway, and it helps you design for behavior, which leads to the next takeaway. One of the key takeaways for this is focus mapping. So Dr. Fogg talks about, in order to create and design behavior, you have to go through this process that he calls is B-storming, right? Or behavior storming. And as you are going through these different behaviors that you want to create, you say, you know what? Hey, what are the ones that I can do? What are the ones that I can't do? What are the high impact behaviors? And what are the low impact behaviors? So you could see his model right here, this matrix. And what I absolutely love about it is it makes it simple and intuitive once you brainstorm new ideas. Which, by the way, for those of you that are familiar with mind mapping, this is going to look really familiar to you when you're doing this kind of work through focus mapping and creating new ideas, which he calls a swarm of bees, is you're sorting them quickly. What I like about this method is you can find the golden habits, as he calls them, or the golden behaviors, which is these are high impact actions, top right hand corner or top right hand quadrant. These are high impact actions that you can fit into your schedule. What this does is it allows you to be honest with yourself, to say, hey, you know what? These behaviors on the left side of the matrix, I can't do. But these on the right, I will do, and you will leave excited because now you have clear steps to move towards the goals that you want to move towards, which then funnels us in to our next key takeaway. The next key takeaway is a starter step. For those of you, you might think of it as a baby step. And it's this idea of, instead of trying to, let's say, write an entire book in a day, some people can do that, but a vast majority of us, it's pretty difficult. So instead, you think of it from the perspective of what's the smallest thing that I could do to move this forward. Another great person, or another great example of this, is Tim Ferriss talks about it, where in one of his podcasts when he's thinking about IBM. So IBM, when they were the 800-pound gorilla and they had just the sales force of Salesforce, if you will, before there was a Salesforce, their daily sales quotas were just 2 calls a day. That was it. And Tim has instituted this in his life with 2 crappy pages a day, as he says.
So make the hurdle, make the success threshold really, really low. That's what I've done for my last 3 books. Is 2 crappy pages per day. That's all I need. If I don't end up using them, that's fine. I just need to get out 2 crappy pages. What ends up happening? Often you will exceed that for extra credit, right? You'll be like, well, I'm already at the gym, I'll go for an extra 10 minutes. Well, I'm already flossing my teeth, I'll do an extra 4. Well, I've already hit my 2 pages, but I'm feeling great and I'm in the flow. Maybe I'll do 10, maybe I'll do 20. But it prevents you from feeling like a failure.
So the idea is simple, is instead of trying to floss all of your teeth, you floss 1 tooth to build momentum to keep going. Because it sounds ridiculous. Who's gonna floss 1 tooth? You're gonna floss all of them. But if you start small, if you start with that baby step, or in this case, this starter step, the rest of the chain of behavior occurs. It's like, you drop that lead domino and the rest follow. And, for those of you who are science nerds out there, think of it as a starter step is a catalyst to chain reaction. In this case, the chain reaction is you doing the behavior that you want to do or you designed for, which leads to our next takeaway. The next key takeaway is the fact that tiny habits do not rely on willpower and motivation. I absolutely love this because in the book, Dr. Fogg talks about the fact that motivation is fickle. It is not reliable, and so you shouldn't rely on it. And same thing with willpower. Yes, I know Jocko says that you could train it, and you can. However, you shouldn't rely on it because that's not a habit then, it's an action that you're still spending a lot of time thinking about. I love the framework that he provides here of seeing how automatic a behavior is, how automatic a habit is. So then it makes it a lot easier to think about, to say, okay, one is an action that you still need to think about, but a habit, automatic, don't need to think about it. So it's that idea of not having to think about it. For those of you who are familiar with UI, UX, there's a great book here that talks about don't make me think. The idea behind this, and this is somewhat counterintuitive, is if you do not have to think about it, then it becomes an easier habit. You don't need to rely on willpower. You can just keep moving forward. So that's a great takeaway, and that funnels us into our next takeaway. The next takeaway being, the more you do a habit, the easier it's going to be. Now I know that sounds so obvious. You're like, of course, Moose. The more I do a habit, the more, the easier it's going to be, the more I want to do it. Because, for those of you who are cognitive psych nerds, right, the neural pathways are just, they're coming together, you're myelinating them. Sorry, went down the science rabbit hole a little too much on there. But it's really important to think about the fact that if you know that a habit's going to be easier to do the more you do it, then you really take the first 15 to 20 repetitions and you say, you know what, this is hard, the learning curve is steep up front, but it'll get better on the back end. And I love that he draws it out in this graph here. As you can see, the habit continues to shift to the right, where it's going to be easier for you to do it each time. Once you understand that, really you can get better at anything you do. And it leads us into this next question that I love the next takeaway, which allows us to really dissect and get better at designing behavior, which is this. So he has two key questions that helps us dissect behavior in this, which is one, what is making this behavior hard to do, which he calls the discovery question. And you can kind of uncover and do an analysis to say, why isn't this working? What's making this behavior hard to do? Example for me is with these YouTube videos. At first it was, where do I need to place the camera? What's the lighting? All these little details. And then naturally it leads to the second question, which he calls a breakthrough question, which is, what can I do to make it easier? Once I have the lighting through smart automation plugs and setting it up all together, I was like, oh, you know what? I can just walk into my studio, hit the button, start recording, and got it all down. And it makes it easier, so every subsequent video, it's easier for me to create and produce. And that's the idea of tiny habits in a nutshell, is once you understand what is making a habit difficult, and he gives this great graphic right here, is the ability chain. And you go through this and you can ask your discover question of what is making this habit difficult. So you could say, why is it difficult for me to make YouTube videos in my case? And then I broke it down and said, okay, well, I'm thinking about lighting. And then I can answer my discovery question by getting to my breakthrough question. What can I do to make this easier? And as a result, naturally, you start to build momentum. And the idea of momentum leads to our final takeaway, is this idea of a motivation wave. The idea of a motivation wave really focuses in on the fact that there are times in your life, and there are times throughout your behavioral design, that you will have predictable spikes in motivation, meaning you will be more motivated to do something in that moment than at other times. So he gives a couple of examples in the book of, let's say, a mother trying to protect her child. Another example can be marketing to a newly expecting mom. Far more motivated than, let's say, an 11-year-old to buy diapers, baby formula, and bottles. Predictable. Now, what's nice about this is he also shows on the graph here, the more motivation you have, the higher the likelihood of you doing something hard to create that habit, to get over the action line, to get to where you want to go to. So why is this important for you? Why is this a key takeaway? Well, you can design around this kind of motivation wave. What do I mean by that? You can actually take your time. You can say, you know what? After this, I get a wave of motivation. It could be talking to someone. It could be seeing a certain image or a certain picture. And after that, you say, oh, you know what? I'm willing to do this hard thing. I want to go further. I want to move more. One example of this is Kobe Bryant talking about the fact that after every game, or at the beginning of every game, he would just look up into the rafters at the Staples Center and just think about adding more banners. That's really important, and that's one way to just keep that motivation going.
Nicholson sat there. Nah, the only thing I notice before every game is I look up at them championship banners and think about adding more.
That's amazing. That was it.
Yeah. Well, you certainly added.
Now, what's nice is you can actually stack your motivation waves with a flow state. For those of you that are unfamiliar, flow states basically are optimal states, and it feeds through this channel of maximum challenge and maximum boredom. What's nice about this is there's some great work, some great research studies that show you can have 16x more productivity during flow states. Now, what happens here is if you take a motivation wave, you're more likely to do something difficult. Then if you stack it in a sense of flow to say, you know what can I do to make it easier for me to get this level of productivity? And then finally, if you bring it together with a sprint, which you can find here in this book, and just talk more about sprints of effectively you're spending, absolute focus time. For those of you who are familiar with Cal Newport, deep work on really mastering a task or spending time to really move it forward. What's nice about that is now all of a sudden you have amplified your productivity. You've allowed for exponential growth instead of incremental growth. So really capitalize on those motivation waves, capitalize on that momentum, and capitalize on those waves like a surfer would, to surf those big waves of motivation and productivity to reach the goals that you want to. Now we're gonna go into a section about a couple of things that you'll love about this book. So one of the key and unique things about this book that you'll love is this concept of skills of change. The reason why you'll love it is because it is empowering. The fact that you can actually work on skills of change, just like someone can work on being a better coder, being a better writer, being a better partner, being a better CEO or mentor or mentee or learner, you can do the same thing for skills of change. Really valuable as an entrepreneur or as a creative because it allows you to be lean or agile or insert any sort of iterative, fast-paced, at-bat methodology from entrepreneurship here. Now that's really fantastic because as you do that, you understand, you could wake up every day just like if you're writing, you wake up and you want to train to be a better writer. You can do the same thing with skills of change and they just kind of build into your everyday. And that's really important to understand, to say, this isn't nature versus nurture, where you're just stuck in one way or it's your genetics. No. You're showing your growth mindset, for those of you that are familiar. And as a result, you're moving from there. You're constantly growing, you're constantly evolving, and you're constantly changing, and you're completely okay with that, which is fantastic. Since I want you to get the most out of reading Tiny Habits, I want to tell you where you'll find the most value. And it's a little bit of a surprising location. It's in the appendix. So in the appendix, you'll find some incredible information. For those of you that are visual thinkers, you will absolutely love the fact that in the appendix, he has an algorithm for how to make behavior easier. So you can go through right here. I absolutely love this because you could follow along easily and see the different places that you can make a habit easier. And then the following pages or the subsequent pages, he also has different algorithms, diagrams, workflow diagrams to show you your behavioral master plan, if you will, for change, for behavioral change. That's absolutely powerful. And then my favorite pages of that appendix, except the workflow diagrams, of course, is he has a section that looks like this, that breaks down 32 habits that you can do. Effectively, it's a collection of starter steps that he has from all of his work at Stanford, all of his work in behavioral design, and he just gives you a springboard to say, hey, if you're gonna dive into behavioral design, use the following things. Use these as a springboard to jump in instead of just brainstorming your own, although you could do that and he recommends it. So what that does for you is you do not have to start from scratch. You don't have to put in a lot of that hard work. And again, I mentioned this idea of don't make me think. So what this allows you to do is when you're designing for behavior, when you want to change things, you can go flip right back to the appendix. I know I do. And it gives me something to kind of think about. So I'm inspired to create and design my own habits so I can work on my skills of change. And hopefully this inspires you to do the same as well. Because behavioral design and behavioral psychology, specifically in this way of getting you to do the things that you want to do, is one of the most important things you can study in your life, period, end of sentence. And yet it is so commonly overlooked that it is honestly a waste of your time. What do I mean by that? I mean that it is a waste of your time if no one has walked you through behavioral design and building your own habits. Because you are leaving so much potential on the table if you do not study and apply these skills of change and apply tiny habits. So with that, leave a comment below. What was the most surprising thing you learned about tiny habits? Tell me a little bit more about what you want to understand about tiny habits or just behavioral design and productivity in general. If you appreciated this video, Smash that like button, hit the subscribe, and I'm excited to share more amazing content with you about how to change your life, how to be more productive, and how to flourish. So I appreciate your time. Can't wait to see you in the next video.